You are lying in the dark and someone begins with 4 words. Once upon a time. Nothing has happened yet. No image, no fact, no proof of anything. And still, something in you leans forward. Your heartbeat can change. Your breathing can slow. Chemicals move through your bloodstream in response to people who have never existed, doing things that never happened. This response is not learned in a classroom. It appears in toddlers before they can tie their shoes, in elders in their final years, in every society ever studied, without exception. No culture has ever been found that does not tell stories, and yet nothing about survival obviously requires them. You cannot eat a story. It builds no shelter. It fights off no predator. So why would a species obsessed with survival spend so much of its limited time and energy on things that are, by definition, not true? The answer reaches back further than language itself, involves a brain chemical that fiction has learned to borrow, and ends somewhere far stranger than a campfire. Consider what a story actually asks of you. To follow even a simple one, you must track who wants what, who is lying, who is in danger, and why, all while sitting perfectly still. When scientists place people inside brain scanners and tell them a story, something remarkable happens. Regions tied to movement, emotion, and sensation light up as though the listener were living the events themselves, not merely hearing them. A well-told story doesn't inform the brain, it occupies it, almost as thoroughly as experience does. But memory is only half the mystery. That distinction matters because our species did not evolve in libraries. For most of human history, knowledge survived only as long as someone could remember it and pass it on by voice, and the demands placed on that voice were enormous. Consider the Aboriginal communities of Australia, whose oral traditions describe coastlines that no longer exist, landmarks now submerged, consistent with sea levels last measured that high at the end of the Ice Age. Researchers studying these traditions have proposed that certain stories may preserve genuine memory of geological change across many thousands of years, passed mouth to mouth, generation to generation, with no script and no ink. If that reading holds, it means a story can function as a kind of technology, not for entertainment, but for keeping the dead accurate. Yet something even stranger was happening, because memory alone doesn't explain the pull of pure fiction, invented people, invented worlds. No ancestral coastline attached at all. For that, researchers have turned to something more intimate, what a story does to a stranger's body while it's being told. In laboratory studies, the neuroeconomist Paul Zak found that participants who watched a short narrative film about a father and his dying son released measurably more oxytocin, the same chemical involved in bonding between parent and infant, than those shown a plotless sequence of the same events. The brain, it turns out, often responds as though these fictional relationships matter, borrowing machinery built for real ones to make sense of people who were never real at all. That borrowing starts astonishingly early. By the age of 2, before most children can hold a proper conversation, they are already inventing scenarios for their toys, assigning wants, fears, and secrets to plastic figures that have neither. Developmental psychologists see this not as idle play, but as rehearsal. A low-stakes gymnasium for a skill called theory of mind, the ability to imagine what is happening inside someone else's head. It is the same skill an early hunter needed to predict a rival's next move. A leader needed to hold an alliance together. A parent needed to read a child too young to speak. Every story, however small, is an exercise machine for guessing what other minds are up to, which may be why the species that tells the most elaborate stories is also the species that cooperates at the largest scale on Earth. But cooperation on that scale requires more than guessing intentions. It requires shared belief, and this is where the story stops being a private tool and becomes something closer to social infrastructure. Among the Juhansi people of the Kalahari, anthropologist Polly Wiesner recorded a striking pattern. Daytime conversation was dominated by complaints, gossip, and economic matters, but roughly 80% of nighttime conversation, once the fires were lit, shifted to storytelling, myths, legends, accounts of distant kin. Wiesner proposed that firelight itself may have changed what human conversation was for. Daylight hours built the practical scaffolding of survival, while darkness, freed from work and visible faces, built something else entirely: shared imagination, extending an audience's sense of who belonged to their world far beyond anyone they would ever meet. And that is the twist worth sitting with. It is tempting to assume stories exist because life needs occasional decoration, a rest from the serious business of survival. The evidence points the other way. Story may not be decoration on top of human cooperation. It may be one of the engineering mechanisms that made large-scale cooperation possible at all, a way of holding thousands of strangers together in a single shared reality none of them could otherwise verify firsthand. Of course, not every claim made about storytelling's origins survives scrutiny. Plenty of popular explanations that stories evolved purely to select mates, or that a specific storytelling gene exists, remain speculative at best. More folklore about storytelling than settled science about it. What the stronger evidence actually supports is narrower, and in some ways, more remarkable. That narrative form itself, quite apart from its content, changes how deeply information lodges in memory. The psychologist Jerome Bruner distinguished between logical, fact-based thinking and narrative thinking, and argued the human mind defaults to the second whenever it can, which is one reason a single well-placed anecdote can outlast a page of statistics in anyone's memory long after the numbers have faded, which brings the thread back to where it started, to a species that cannot stop turning experience into narrative even when no one is listening. You do it constantly, and mostly without noticing, replaying an argument with better lines, narrating your own morning to yourself as you make coffee, imagining how today will be described tomorrow. That is not idle mental noise. It is the same machinery, the same borrowed intimacy, the same rehearsal of other minds, the same nightly fire running quietly in the background of an ordinary Tuesday. So the next time a voice says "once upon a time," and something in your chest leans forward before a single fact has been offered, remember this. Long before humans built cities, stories were already building humans.